All right. So, hi, everybody. This is True Crime Arizona host Brianna Whitney.
And photographer, producer,
editor, basically does everything, Sergio Hernandez. And let me turn down my phone. Sorry about that. We wanted to do this Facebook Live today because it's the very first podcast episode of our new season on the True Crime Arizona podcast, Finding Robert Fischer.
and this is a big one for us because we've kind of tried to up the ante each time we do an investigation, each time we put out a series, and this one's exciting me. It's coming out good.
It is good. And so I think I'm going to have the questions kind of up as we're going because we want to have people weigh in. But to most Arizonans, the Robert Fischer case isn't something new. People know about it. It's probably the most famous true crime case in the history of this state.
Yeah, I would.
One of
say,
them.
It captured everybody's attention, and just him. I know we're going to recap it, but just him going missing and being missing, and some people say on the run this long, other people don't. But
yeah,
it's gotten the attention internationally too.
So for those who don't know, let's just give a little bit of the backstory on the crime itself. This happened over 20 years ago. On April 10th, 2001, South Scottsdale residents woke up to this massive explosion. I mean, just not a normal house fire, a massive explosion. Some of the people watching this might have even lived through that. Anybody who lived in that area remembers it because it was so loud.
You would have had to have. I mean, the amount of fire that went out there to cover it, the sound of it, the neighborhood shook. And I'm only saying that because I remember being out there covering part of this.
Yeah, you were here.
And yeah, I mean, the neighborhood, everybody came out. They were just in shock.
Yeah.
Obviously, when the rest of the story came out, which was?
Well, so investigators get there, fire investigators, police detectives, and they find 3 bodies inside the home, which ended up being Mary Fischer, and that was Robert's wife, and then their 2 kids, 12-year-old Brittany and 10-year-old Bobby. And at first, I think a lot of people thought Robert was actually inside that house as well.
Yeah, that was the biggest thing.
They
were, when the explosion happened and fire was able to go in there and start searching it, from what we know now is, their impression was there's 4 bodies here. We need to find 4 bodies. And because of the damage, because of the fire, because of everything, it was just really, really difficult to find the bodies. And when they only found 3, it was that's when the whole mystery started.
And part of the mystery, too, was that Robert's truck, his own truck, was in the driveway.
Yeah.
Mary's car was missing. And so that just stirred all of these kind of, not necessarily rumors, but theories of what happened here. I mean, this was crazy. But as investigators went in to the house, they found that Mary, Brittany, and Bobby didn't die in the house fire. They'd actually died before the house fire. Yes. Their throats were slit so badly they were almost decapitated. Just horrible, horrible, horrible. And in this season and our investigation on this, we actually see the crime scene photos
for the first time, as far as I know. I think we are the first.
I think so. At least as many as we had access to. Yeah. And it was hard to look at. I know everybody who's listening, we all know the crime. We all know the family. We've seen that family portrait over and over again. We've seen the house fire video. Yep. But to actually see their bodies, that was hard.
It wasn't as disturbing for me. There was Bobby's was a little more disturbing because he was really the only one you could definitely see the outline of the body and and then recognize the burn damage to him.
Yeah, he was most intact.
Yeah.
But that it comes later in this investigation. That is when, at that point, they're found. Robert's not there. He didn't show up for work, and it's an all-out manhunt to find Robert Fischer.
Yeah.
Wasn't until 10 days later they actually end up finding his car, Mary's car, that he took up near Young, Arizona in the woods. They found his dog alive. They found the hat he was last seen wearing in an ATM video in the car. So at that time, investigators definitely thought they were going to find him. I mean, he was in that area for all they knew.
And I'd say for each one of their leads that they had was just confusing. Going back to the Mary's car, he took Mary's car instead of his.
Yeah, it's weird.
Even though his would have been packed up with probably his regular hiking gear or camping gear, whatever he needed, he took her truck, which was strange. The last photos we saw of him at the ATM pulling out $280, and then the 10 days later finding the car, and then finding the not car but the SUV, and then finding it with his dog alive, guarding it. Nothing inside it to
Like nothing.
It was almost like it was cleaned.
Yeah.
Just wiped. There was barely items in there. There was a few items. There was this hat. I think a couple of miscellaneous things, but really nothing that could tell you, was he camping? Was he alive? Did he bring food? Did he? Yeah, we just don't know.
We don't know. And more or less, that's where the story stops.
Yeah.
I mean, there has been no credible sighting of Robert Fischer since then, and that was in April of 2001. So I think the question probably to you and I is, what's new about this case? Why choose this case to investigate? And we've done this long enough now on the True Crime Arizona podcast and doing things on TV, 3TV, CBS 5, to know that we kind of like to do these investigations ourselves. It's not just we're journalists and we're going to talk to you, we're going to put it together. We actually wanted to retrace those moments leading up to what happened, where it happened, and then where tips came in afterward. And I think what people can kind of get from this and this season and the documentary that we're also doing on this, there are things that nobody has seen before in this season. We're talking crime scene pictures. We're talking full evidence file access. I mean, the detectives, something that was kind of cool was Sergio and I have been working on this case really for about 3 years. We actually started this a long time ago.
I was going to say, yeah, we've already done this case. We covered it. And, you know, usually we don't go back to a case, but in this situation, we had just really great, shout out to Scottsdale PD. They've been great. They've been amazing, just being very generous with information and, you know, the evidence that they have. So at first I was like, do we want to go back to Robert Fischer? Then after looking into it and Brianna investigating it more and talking to Scottsdale PD, we were like, yeah, we have to. There's too many things that we're learning that, for one, haven't been out there. For two, people just don't know or haven't seen.
Yes, so that includes pictures, some of the pictures in this investigation. And as the podcast episodes come out, we're going to put those pictures online so that you can go and see them as you're listening, but they'll also be in the documentary. You've probably heard of some crazy tips that have come in. Canada, Mexico, Europe, all over the United States, Guatemala. The Canada one is a tip that so many have heard of for years. You know, basically this man had the same missing tooth as Robert, the same back scar, looked like him. A Scottsdale neighbor is still convinced it was him, and the fingerprints didn't match. Interestingly enough, we had never seen pictures of that person.
No.
Now we have. And it's not just him. There's a couple other tips that are real interesting, some of which they have not ruled out if that was Robert or not.
Yeah, and not only that, during our investigation, as we're interviewing people, they would drop little hints about experiences they had or tips that they had about finding Robert Fischer. You know, we interviewed a Glendale PD officer.
Yeah, for a completely different case.
And he happened to have a tip. We're not going to mention that right now because it's...
it comes up later.
Yeah.
But just as we started doing our own investigation, and you're right, thanks to Scottsdale PD for allowing us so much access to those files, we were learning more and more and more. And it wasn't just the tips. In this first episode, we introduced you to a man named Herb Greenback, who is friends with Robert. His wife and him employed Mary. Tight. It was a tight relationship, but Herb and Robert weren't super good friends.
Yeah.
They were friendly.
They were, I would say almost they were more like acquaintances. It seems like the wives were the better friends, the best friends, I should say. And Herb and Robert were the husbands connected to that.
Yeah, and why it's so important that we interviewed Herb during this is because he was the person that was with Robert camping and ATVing up near Young, Arizona, 2 weeks before the murders and the explosion.
And when we say up near Young, Arizona, actually almost exactly where the truck was found. I'm not sure if it was exactly, but very, very close.
And that's what triggered the Greenbacks in general to be like, oh my God, this was where his car was found. That's where we were. We were just there. Yeah. And we've heard that story before, but Herb's never talked about it. And the things he told us about things Robert said on that trip, things Robert did on that trip, and even just letting us into some of the stories and experiences about Robert, around his friends, things like that.
Yeah.
It was eerie. Some of it was eerie. Some of it just made my skin crawl.
I would agree.
It's
Yeah, some of
weird.
it was creepy. I mean, Herb described him. The way Herb described him was just something was off at times. And
it's really important that Herb is in this story, and I think it gives a lot more context as to what was to come. Some foreshadowing that we didn't really know before this. And I asked Herb, why now? Why talk to me? And why share your story? And he's like, you know what? It's been more than 20 years. I want closure. I want him to be found. Whether he's dead or alive, I want this to be solved. And I think we all do. And that's part of why, and a big reason why, we wanted to do this case. There's so many people who were left with so much pain from what he did. People want answers, and they really deserve them too.
Yeah.
Herb is a big part of episode 1, but he's also really a big part of the entire investigation. And there are theories of where Robert is and if he's alive or dead. But Herb, based on what he experienced with Robert on that camping trip, brought a whole new theory into play that we had never heard.
And just, new theory, new perspective, because we never really got to speak to anybody that knew Robert on a personal level and, interacted him with, like just having a conversation with him,
Yeah.
There was nobody that would that either would speak to us or wanted to speak to us about it. And Herb's been the only one that came forward, and he's been amazing.
Yeah. And I think too, we didn't necessarily know where all this investigation was going to take us. We spent time underground in caves, which was actually a really cool experience.
Yeah.
But, we're underground. We ended up at a random grocery store.
Yeah.
We ended up on a really beautiful ranch, but that was a whole nother part of this investigation, and people we didn't expect to become part of this investigation either.
And this just goes back to all the little leads. Every time we did an interview, like I said, we got more tips and more leads, and we followed them, and the story and the case ended up getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I mean, to a point to where I think one of the tips we got, I want to say we mentioned it to Scottsdale PD for the first time.
We did. And that's the thing. Every time I've talked to Scottsdale PD too, John Heinzelman, the lead detective on the case now, is still getting tips every time we talk to him. He'll come in to sit down for an interview or show us something, and he'll be like, oh, I just got a call from Florida, or I just got a call for Robert Fischer. I mean, we're talking 21 years ago. That's how relevant this still is, and how top of mind this case still is. And up until recently, Robert Fischer was still on the top 10's, FBI's top 10 most wanted list. He was recently removed like 5 months ago or so.
Yeah.
And the only reason he was removed was because they basically were like, we've exhausted all of our leads, and his picture's been out there and it's still out there, but we're not getting anywhere. And so they felt, all right, he's gotten enough attention on this top 10 list for decades. We're going to take him off. But Scottsdale PD's investigation hasn't changed at all. That's still, top priority.
They're still working on it. Yeah, like he said, John Houseman, he's been great. He, I want to say he quoted about 10,000 tips over the years.
It was another detective, Hugh Lockerbie.
Oh, okay, Hugh Lockerbie.
10 to 20,000 tips, I think, is what they told. I mean, just an absurd number. That is not normal for a caseload. And I'm watching the comments here just coming in. It's interesting for everybody who's watching, people talking about where you think he is, and if you think he's alive or dead. And they're all over. I'm seeing Colorado. I'm seeing, nearby.
Just scrolling through that, can you tell
he's gone, he's dead?
Are people leaning towards alive or dead?
I don't know. Some people are just kind of saying he's crazy, he's out there. But I want to know, for those who are watching us, if you guys could type here too, do you think he's alive or dead? Because that is a huge controversy. I don't want to call it a controversy, but it's a conflict of interest for people who believe two completely different things, whether he's alive or dead. And Sergio and I are not going to tell you guys right now, because that's going to come up later in our investigation, what we both think. And I would say for the most part, you and I are probably on the same page on that.
Yes.
With the whole thing. And then it's like, okay, you decide if he's alive or dead. Well, then where is he if he's alive or dead? Is he in Arizona? Is he in the United States? Is he out of the country? I'm seeing somebody here, Carol, says she worked with him at the hospital. So that's interesting. I mean, and the Fischers were totally your normal family. I mean, she's right. Robert Fischer worked at Mayo Clinic. He had a good job. The Fishers were very involved in church. The kids, I think they were in Girl Scouts. They played chess. They played sports. I think Bobby played basketball. I mean, just totally your normal family.
But, I mean, so this is a good point. So it was Carol that said she worked with them.
Yeah.
This was a difficult part for journalists when we were investigating this, is that people didn't want to talk. They wanted to distance themselves from this case. They didn't want to talk to us. They just wanted to talk to Scottsdale PD. Mm-hmm. And so that was hard for us. I think that's part of the reason why this case has been so interesting for so many people for so long, is that they want more answers. They just want more information.
And it's hard because there's two different aspects to this case. And I think we try to really address both in the podcast, but you have the crime itself, and that part is just heartbreaking. I mean, going through, God, for this investigation, I don't even know how many hours of footage I watched and logged of interviews, but I mean, we're talking just so much. And some of the footage I think that resonated the most was seeing people talk about them at the funeral. Mary, Brittany, and Bobby, you see the house fire and all of that, but they were so innocent, and so many people came out to honor their lives during that funeral and just talk about them. And you're hearing about these kids who are in elementary school. It's just heartbreaking. Yeah. So you have that aspect of wanting to keep their memory alive and really just kind of honor these lives that they lived, short lives they lived, but nonetheless very important. And then you have that mysterious factor about this that really captivates people. Where did Robert go? Why did he do this? Did he snap? Did he plan this? I mean, there's so many unanswered questions. You could go on and on and on about, here's what we're still missing information-wise, and it's a lot. Yeah.
I've gotten frustrated over the years, and we've tried to be better about this in this investigation, is that I understand that the horrible crime, gruesome crime that he committed, but he's overshadowed the 3 lives that he took, because he's the focus. He's always the one we talk about. And I think me and Brianna both felt the same going into this, is like, we need to give the people information about Mary and the kids so that they can be more prominent in this story, because they're the victims in this. Unfortunately, the suspect, the murderer, the father, is the one that everybody focuses on, because he's the
fugitive.
Missing.
Yeah. But you're right. And I think it's easy for people to forget about that aspect of things. And so we really try to do both. And I'm seeing people kind of commenting, where can you find the podcast? Some people are seeing it, some people aren't. So it's really easy. Wherever you listen to your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, any of that, just type in True Crime Arizona. And it looks a lot like this, except for it says True Crime Arizona. And then the latest episode is episode 1, called Finding Robert Fischer, The Murders. And Finding Robert Fischer is really the overall season title, because we quite literally are taking our investigation to try and find answers about him. And I would say what we found is so interesting that I'm excited to share it with everybody, because there's an excitement to at least show people what we've been able to find in a case that has had not a lot of developments for so long.
Yeah, and the idea between the series and the other, I should say, the documentary and the podcast series, was bringing the audience with us. You know what I mean? Taking you on the journey with us of investigating this. Like I said, we started this with one idea and, kind of how we're going to do this. And then it evolved each time we did an interview, each time we talked to someone, it evolved into something else. And now I'm super proud of what we're doing with it. But now it's just, it's great to bring people along with us, show them some of the behind the scenes stuff.
And that's the thing. I think too, journalism has evolved a lot. And this is something I'm really conscious of, especially in my age group of people who are getting their storytelling in different means, especially podcasts. I think people want to see what we're doing and it not be so, here's what I'm saying and here's what we're doing. Like, I want to take you into the nitty gritty with us. It's not always glamorous. It can sometimes be heartbreaking. I mean, you were filming me as I was seeing those crime scene photos for the first time.
Yeah.
And the look on my face is just very raw. And that's maybe not something we would normally show, but I want you guys to see that. I mean, this is a terrible thing that happened, and we're human.
Yeah.
And I think the more you can come with us on the investigation, behind the scenes, raw, genuine, really, all curtains drawn, the better.
Yeah, yeah. And it's funny because when Brianna was looking at the crime scene investigation, and I'm shooting, any photographer would tell you shooting through the lens, it takes your emotion out of the situation because you're focused on what you're doing. But I was looking at Brianna, and there's a part in there when I asked her, I'm like, what do you think about seeing that? And to her credit, she answered, but you could tell that there was a little bit of, just emotion behind her answer.
Yeah, I wasn't overly succinct in my answer.
But you were professional.
Yeah, professional, sure, but I wasn't. It was like my thoughts were everywhere, and that's how I felt looking at them. You don't even know really what to say, and it makes the case so much more personal, because now when I talk about the case, that's what I have in my mind are these pictures that I hadn't seen before. It's one thing when you're looking at the smiling Fischer family of 4 portrait. It's another thing when you're looking at dead bodies that are burned and part of their neck sliced open in the middle of debris from a house explosion. And seeing that, I can't imagine what investigators thought or even went through seeing that in person. Yeah. It's hard enough over pictures. I mean, I know some people on here are commenting too that they have heard about this case or have listened on other podcasts. And that is a really good point. There are a lot of true crime podcasts out there. Yes. We know that. But what makes ours different? I think for something like this, when you have these other crime podcasts that are going over cases, they're usually looking at information online that they find from other news agencies or things like that and kind of, putting that into one. We are quite literally conducting the investigation ourselves. We are sitting down with the investigators, the families, the friends, people who have called in tips. I mean, this is truly like ground zero for the investigation. And you're not going to get that anywhere else besides the True Crime Arizona podcast for the Robert Fischer case.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. Taking any other questions that you guys have, it is just so interesting reading all of these.
For me, it was a little bit strange when you're talking about, how this just captured everybody's attention is if I ended my career right now, this is the story that would have bookended it.
It is weird.
I've been, 23 years, so it would have started, a couple years into my career, and now if I ended right now, it would have bookended my whole career. And there you go. Robert Fischer for 20 years.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. I was 9 years old at the time this happened, so I was not there at the beginning, but I think this case has probably been the case that's interested me, captivated me, and really the one that I've poured most of my passion into, or a lot of it, since I've been here in Arizona. And I think it just goes to show, too, how important relationships are these days. The fact that we've been able for years to build this relationship, really the two of us, with these detectives, with these people involved in the case. I think part of the only reason Herb ended up talking to us was because we interviewed his wife 3 years ago, and I've stayed in contact with her.
And Lori, that was a great interview.
She's amazing.
Too.
Yeah.
She was super sweet. She gave us, she was probably the most emotional person we've talked to during our whole investigation.
Definitely.
Because she had a personal connection to Mary.
And the kids.
Yeah, and the kids. But she just, I remember her saying, I believe she missed her friend. She just misses Mary, being around.
Yeah. It's just, the whole thing is honestly so heartbreaking. But the for me personally, there's the wanting justice for Mary, Brittany, and Bobby. Answers. People want answers, and I get why. It's an infuriating case. And quite honestly, that's the emotion I feel a lot of times writing these stories is this is so frustrating and almost anger that he's still out somewhere, whether he's dead or alive. He hasn't been found, and people want answers. That's part of it. The other part is just that mystery of I've always been fascinated in kind of putting these pieces together and connecting the dots. And is there something missing here? Is there something with new technology that we can now see? One thing that I thought was super interesting is when we were in the evidence file, we were using my phone to look through a magnifying glass to analyze Robert Fischer's fingerprints from his military cards. And at the time, I know we were talking, there weren't that many cameras around in 2001. And here we are sitting with the evidence file on an iPhone, looking at these fingerprints with high quality. Just who would have known technology would have come so far?
Oh, yeah.
And that would have changed this case as well. It would have,
It would have, I don't know what this case would have been if it happened today.
I don't think you could pull it off today. I really don't.
I don't know about that. I think somebody could. Unfortunately, I
Really?
think somebody could. Yeah.
I disagree with that one because I just think there's too many cameras everywhere. I mean, you're bound to get caught somewhere, even if you're trying not to. There's just so many more than there were in 2001.
But I would say that the knowledge you can acquire literally at your fingertips on how to commit a crime, you could probably get away with it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the internet can be used for all sorts of things. Thank you for that, Sergio.
That wasn't creepy at all, right?
Yeah, no. Thank you. But he's right. I mean, there's just the access to everything these days is so much different than life was like back then. So it would have changed the scope of the investigation. Even if you think he could have pulled it off, I still think we would have had at least more pictures of him crossing wherever, getting caught on a doorbell camera or a traffic camera. We only have the ATM pictures of him.
Yeah.
And that was the night before he left and set that house on fire. So it just changes everything. And I'm just still reading some of these comments here. A lot of people basically saying he's dead, he's alive, he's on the run. I mean, I have never seen people so split on one thing. And that doesn't just go for you guys watching.
Yeah.
This goes for quite literally everybody. In our newsroom, nobody agrees if he's alive or dead.
Yes.
The detectives themselves in this investigation don't agree on whether he's alive or dead.
Yeah.
And that has always been crazy to me. Usually there's some sort of consensus or maybe majority. I honestly don't even think there's a majority on this.
Specifically, within the, with the police. I mean, you expect them, the detective, you expect them to agree on this. Okay, look, we're all in line. We think he's dead, or we think he's alive, or we think he's here. But no, each one of them has their own theories and ideas, and each one of us would give us their own input too.
Yeah.
Oh, I think this, and what about this?
Yeah.
Make us question
our own
investigation. Like maybe we need to go that way.
Right. It was weird. There's a good question on here. It says, this is from David. Have they shared all of the tips they had on him, or just the ones that were more likely to be a true sighting? That's a good question.
So they were very forthcoming with a lot of tips, but I think there were so many. When you go back to the numbers, the tens of thousands of tips, there are tons of them that they can't investigate. One I think they mentioned was pictures they'll be sent from security footage. Hey, look at this guy. Looks just like Robert Fischer. It might look exactly like him, but how do you follow up with that if there's no email, no phone number, maybe a contact phone number, but that person has to answer the phone and want to answer the questions. So I mean, sometimes the tip is nothing but just hey, check this out.
Yeah, and going through, I mean, they had like a binder yay big of these written tips, and back then they had to rank on a scale of 1 to 5, I think, how sure they were that it was Robert Fischer. They saw it. And I'm like, what is that? I've never seen that before. But a lot of people were writing, I'm 100% sure. I'm 5.
Yeah.
And then the tip was, I saw this guy in a grocery store.
Yeah.
What do you do with that? And I think that's part of the problem too, is that people will call in and say, I saw this person that looked like Robert Fischer at these intersection, crossroads at 3 p.m. on Tuesday. Well, now it's Friday. How do you find, you can't find that person. And that's probably one of the more frustrating parts for detectives is they do follow up on every tip that they get. It's not that they don't, and they have these binders full. We saw them.
Binders and boxes.
Oh my gosh, so much. So many. But the ones that we focus on in this investigation are some of the more credible tips, some of which have either been solved or are still a mystery as to if it was him or not.
Yeah, and also we also tried to focus on the ones that we could be either verbally descriptive for the podcast or visually descriptive. Show a picture, something we can actually show somebody. Yeah. And we kind of pick those out. That way we can, give you guys as much information that we can.
And I think one other part, too, that I want to bring up, it's just because you never know who you might see. And I will say, there are people in this investigation that believe Robert Fischer is still in Arizona. That could be anybody watching this could come across him. We just don't know. But everybody thinks they're looking for him. That guy right there. The problem is that was Robert Fischer 20 plus years ago. And that is the hardest part with missing people cases is you think in your mind you are looking for the picture of that person that you have seen for decades, but 20 years you're going to age,
Yeah.
and he's not going to look exactly the same. And it's so hard to even produce an accurate age modified picture. It's nearly impossible because people just age differently than, mocking that up to
Yeah.
look like an older person.
Well, not only that, I mean, think about it this way. I mean, you look at a picture like this, and he was in very good shape at
Yeah.
that point
Yeah.
in his life, because we actually saw him without his shirt on or tank tops. He was in really good shape.
Yeah.
But imagine him 30 pounds, 40 pounds heavier.
I wouldn't look like the same person.
No, not at all. Bald, 40 pounds heavier, beard, mustache. Nobody would ever recognize him.
And that's what's hard. He's fairly nondescript, and we've said this over and over in this season too. I mean, Robert Fischer could quite literally be anybody, and that makes it really difficult.
Yeah. And I mean, just like the kids and Mary are frozen in time, the way they looked, he's frozen in time because we haven't found him yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or we haven't found a body yet.
Yeah. I mean, my only concept of the Fischers is just what was.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's really most people's too. I want to thank everybody for joining us. This has been a really awesome conversation. I've loved watching people kind of give their input. I was there,
Yeah.
I saw this, or I worked with him. That was interesting. And then just giving us the alive or dead. I'm glad to see that nothing has changed and that people are still very split on whether he is dead or alive. But it's very easy to find the True Crime Arizona podcast. I know we have linked it on here as well, so that information's there. If you just click it, you can go listen to it on every podcast platform. You're just looking for True Crime Arizona. It's got a big rock on it. That's what the font looks like. You can't miss it. And if you like our Robert Fischer investigation, we have some other big investigations that are on there as well.
Yep.
As for what you can expect, episode 1 drops today. Episode 2 will drop 2 weeks from today. So like every other week is when we're releasing. We're going to have 6 to 7 episodes. And then the documentary on this is airing on 3TV on August 20th. At 6 p.m. So what's kind of cool is you can listen to our podcast season. You can get going in it and listen and all that, and then really put the visuals together with what you're hearing in about 2 months. And we're looking forward to it. I appreciate everybody who, has joined in on this, but also just our listeners. Over the last year and a half, we've really enjoyed learning how to put together a podcast and really take our true crime investigations to the next level, just beyond the TV. Yeah. And so I think for us, having the support from you guys and just kind of expanding our skill set and our knowledge to adapt to how journalism and storytelling is changing and evolving is pretty cool.
Yeah.
For the two of us, we love it. And we want to put our best foot forward for the families that are involved in these cases, and then also our listeners and our viewers on TV too. So
yeah, the families that let us tell their stories.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, we never take that for granted. So thank you, everybody. Download True Crime Arizona. You'll see Finding Robert Fischer, episode 1, right there at the top. We'd love a 5-star review if you like it. If you want to leave a comment, we enjoy those too. And that way it gets more populated so more people download the podcast as well. But we're looking forward to sharing this season with you. Thanks so much for watching.